Hey everyone, Sleepy Reader, aka Damien. I'm still in my backyard. Same day, same shirt. I have gotten a more serious drink now, I guess. The Hazy Little Thing IPA from Sierra Nevada. Kind of one of my go-tos now. Actually, I go to the store now. I used to have a good grip on all the beers available locally and I guess from the West Coast. But they've all changed a lot, and there's a lot more now, and I'm having trouble finding favorite beers. So with the super expansion of beers here in the Northwest, I'd say there's more beers that I don't like than there used to be. There's probably more beers that I do like, but it's just harder to find them. And a lot of the ones I used to get a lot are hard to find, or maybe don't exist anymore. But so I found this to be kind of a good fallback. So it's going to be even more of a motley haul this time. Real scruffy stuff from the bargain bins, except maybe this one. This Omnibus of Jonah Hex. And I've had this for a while, and I read a little bookmark in here. I've read up to here. And it's all been stories written by John Albino. John Albano, and all art by Tony DeZuniga. And they've all been great, but they've been kind of very, very dark, negative, grim stories. Very effective, so that I only really want to read one at a time. And so for a while I was reading one every night, and then I just didn't feel like reading stuff such grim stuff at night, and I kind of switched to reading some X-Men. But I plan to get back to it. But I kind of dread what I'll think once Michael Fleischer comes on and John Albano leaves. And I think that I think that Tony DeZuniga will leave too. But to eventually come back. But I think another artist took over for him. Anyway, it's great stuff. Not stuff you could read large amounts in a sitting. Still Tony DeZuniga art on this Michael Fleischer one. So we'll see what that change over to Michael Fleischer is. When I was a kid, I always found Michael Fleischer a unsatisfying writer. Like, he would do some interesting things, but I don't know what I'll think of him as an adult. Here's art by someone else. Anyway, so that's one of the things I've been reading quite a bit of lately. Now on to stuff that I just found from the cheap bins. Before, in the previous haul video from this backyard, I showed you a journal in which they had a review that was Putting Down Saber by Don McGregor and Paul Gulacy. And as chance would have it, I picked up a couple of these issues from those bargain bins. Unfortunately, not number one. So I think I only had number one back in the 80s. I think I was also a bit down on McGregor's love of overwriting, but I think I'll have more patience for it now. And I certainly, I think Paul Gulacy only did the first two issues, but I definitely want to have those. I want to have any Paul Gulacy I can find. And it looks really good. Oh, there's a backup story here. Who's that? Looks like, yes, Charles Vess. Elaine Lee and Charles Vess. So that's interesting too. So, what did they call it in Comics Journal? Unsubtle? No, I can't remember now. But so then I also found issue 4, which is actually a much better paper stock. It is drawn by Billy Graham. And boy, do those pages look packed. Billy Graham had a very short career in comics, as far as I can tell. And the only other comics I know him on are Black Panther with Don McGregor, which had very cool art, but I think it was inked by Klaus Janson, if I remember correctly. Here it's inked by George F. and P. George F. and P. Is that George Foreman? And here is issue 3. I should have shown that first. And this one, so starting with issue 4, was on the nicer paper stock. This has a picture of Don McGregor with his son. And a backup story by Don McGregor and Tom Sutton. That's also interesting. I always like to find hidden gems of Tom Sutton around the corner. So, I think I'll dig into these pretty soon and see what I think, although I would like to find issue 1. Another little oddity, something from something called Eternity Comics, or just Eternity. Issue number 1 of Cosmic Heroes. Does that picture look vaguely familiar to you? If it does, it's because you know what the old Buck Rogers comic strip from when? The 30s looked like? So dates here. So this comic is not actually a comic book. It's a reprint of comic strips printed across the page. I assume that's the best way to get their original size. Boy, is there a lot of writing in these comic strips. I believe that Buck Rogers predates Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon was kind of a Buck Rogers imitation in a sense, although obviously much more elegantly drawn. I wonder if the impact of these would be better in color. But anyway, this is probably what they looked like back then. Anyway, published in black and white. So that just seemed like an interesting curiosity to me. I could tell. Actually, I recognized the old Buck Rogers drawing on the cover when I picked it up, but I kind of hoped there might be other cosmic heroes in here besides Buck Rogers and his girlfriend Wilma. At one point, was Wilma a glamorous name to have? And then I grabbed another one of these DC specials, the Earth-Shattering Disasters. I feel like I have another DC comic that's also about disasters, or maybe about monsters. But this is a great Jim Aparo. Oh, I thought it was a Jim Aparo cover, but it says Milgram on it. Huh, what do I know? Wow, I don't like to make mistakes like that. Let's see what's on the inside. Is it reprints? Got 3 stories. A Batman one called The Town Came Tumbling Down, a Aquaman called The Creature of Death and Darkness, and a Legion of Superheroes, The City That Stopped Dead. That Batman one looks brand new. So it's kind of a 10-pager Batman. Yeah, Jerry Conway, Don Newton, Dan Adkins. So I think this would have been a new comic at the time it was published. So this was all new material. Even the the Legion of Superheroes looks newish. Paul Levitz and Arvell Jones and Bob Layton. So I don't know what the story behind DC Special is. I know that for a while it was reprints and then it went to new stuff. I don't know if it was tryouts or what the point was. Was 60 cents was probably they kept experimenting with higher priced comics because they thought the newsstand owners would be more interested in those. And then a Rich Buckler not oddity, just a Rich Buckler obscurity, I guess. The Secret Society of Supervillains with Rich Buckler art on the cover and inside. But maybe not that prime Rich Buckler that I love so much. But it's okay. And who is it written by? Written by Bob Rozekis. Not a writer that ever stood out on my radar. But I love, for some reason, I love Marvel supervillain team up, and I like these Society of Supervillains type of idea. Another thing I'll always pick up is Edgar Rice Burroughs based comics when I can, especially when they're cheap. And this gives us some Korak, some John Carter of Mars, and some, what was his name, the guy on Venus. And the treat of the Venus story is Carson. Is it John Carson or someone else Carson on Venus? So they just call this Carson of Venus Mutiny at Sea. Script by Len Wein, art by Michael W. Kaluta, M.W. Kaluta. One of those artists that, when I entered collecting comics, was very sought after and was already kind of moving out of regular comics and doing special projects that people with more money than I, as an 11-year-old, would buy. And there are 2 Kaluta Carson of Venus stories in here. Plus there's these pin-ups of fantastic Edgar Rice Burroughs creatures. So they don't put Edgar Rice Burroughs' name on the cover, but it is kind of Edgar Rice Burroughs thing. And if you're my age, you probably remember how much Edgar Rice Burroughs was everywhere, all over the science fiction sections of bookstores. His stuff had a huge revival, I guess, maybe partially due to Frazetta covers in the late 60s on through the 70s. I don't think anyone cares about him anymore, other than the John Carter movie they made that was kind of a flop. And I think when they made that movie, John Carter of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs was out of copyright. But I don't know if making that movie complicates rights and things like that. But that's why you see all these Deja Thoris books from, what is it? Is it Dynamite that does them or someone else? Because it's probably not in copyright and they can do whatever they want. So another oddity, I thought I was just getting something that was like another issue of Not Brand Ec, this magazine called ARG from Marvel, number 5. Warning, this comic mag will make you go ARG. Tell me, Count Varicose, how long have you had the delusion that you're a vampire? But the joke is, haha, his therapist is a werewolf. But every story in here is copyright 1972, Mike Esposito and Ross Andrew. I don't know who wrote and drew it. I think maybe that those two were studio mates and did a lot of art together. But where was it originally published? Because this is a 1974 magazine, and you don't normally in a Marvel comic see something copyright by the two artists. So this must have been reprinted from somewhere else, but I have no idea what. So all of the, I think all of the stories in here are spoofs of horror characters. This is a spoof of The Thing. Probably not John Carpenter's The Thing, but the earlier movie The Thing, I believe. I don't think it would have come out by 72. I'd love to know, did Ross Andrew do the pencils and Mike Esposito do the inks, or did they work in some other way? Because they list Esposito's name first. Did Esposito write the scripts? Here's one at the back that doesn't hold a copyright thing. I can't tell who. It's supposedly by J. Von Fraud, Der Spider and Der Fly. I think it's making fun of the Spider and the Fly poem. Anyway, so this seems very odd. Oh, and the cover says it's by Andrew and Esposito. Someone out there probably knows the history of ARG magazine, which I don't. So another old 80s indie comic was John Sable Freelance, which I don't recall having much interest in when it came out at the time, even though I was a Mike Grell fan. Maybe I tried one issue and it just, I wanted sword play and it was gun play. I'm not sure what. Or the idea that he was a mercenary in the modern day world was not appealing to me because of the moral grayness, even though I don't mind like Conan being a mercenary in the ancient world. But I don't really remember much about it. I think I may have only read one issue back, in 1982 or whenever it originally came out. When is this issue number 2 from? copyright number 3. Whoops. But Gore Vidal, I think it was Gore Vidal, mentioned reading this recently and enjoying it. So when I saw a few issues in the bargain bin, I thought I'd just grab them and see how they were. So that's number 2. Wait, is that number 2? Yeah, I keep getting number 2. So the one thing they don't put in the bargain bin is the number 1 of these comics that no one wants. Or maybe someone else went through the bargain bin and picked out all the number 1s of these First and Eclipse books. Here is number 5. The Origin Part 3. I think these might be available digitally. I'm not sure. A lot of the stuff from the indie comics back then is not. But since Grell owns it, he may have released it digitally. I feel like I saw it somewhere. This is issue number 10. Still by Grell. It's kind of beautiful artwork. I saw some of this artwork going for very cheap on Heritage Comics, like they were selling whole issues worth of artwork as in a batch. But I wasn't sure whether I wanted it or not, so I didn't bid on it. And here is number 29, and Grell's still on it. He didn't stick with Star Slayer. I think he left that very early on. That was his other indie comic. I assume, Grell became kind of a superstar or quote superstar, at least well known to hardcore comic book fans, with Warlord. And then I don't know if he was still working on Warlord while doing indie comics, or if he left DC Comics to go do a bunch of indie comics and then came back to DC and was kind of a new guy with a different approach when he was doing the Longbow Hunters and things like that. And nowadays, more people know him for that Green Arrow work than for the Warlord. But to me, the Warlord was his big thing. The comic shop was giving this one away for free. They have a little box of free stuff, and I usually don't spend much time searching through it. But this is a 1980 Batman, written by Len Wein, art by Irv Novick. I didn't like Irv Novick, but just looking at it, I actually, at least Irv Novick at this point, has what is to me now a very appealing art style. Definitely in an old school nostalgic vein. I think Irv Novick died young. Is that right? And then he was the one who was doing the Justice League, and then he died suddenly, and George Perez took over. I'm probably right. It might have been someone else. So continuing with these bargain bin things, the final issue of a comic I never heard of, Lost Planet. But it looked kind of cool. And it is written and drawn by Bo Hampton, who I seem to remember either from Epic Comics or from Heavy Metal. I think probably Epic. I wonder if he did the colors too. No, coloring by someone named Tom Littlejohn. That's interesting coloring for the early 80s. I like the title Lost Planet. So I'll probably want to hunt down the first 5 issues. A lot of interesting stuff going on there in the 80s that I was only half aware of. Here's a book by Wolfman, Hampton, and Bryant, so I assume Bo Hampton, a super series called Zed. So Marv Wolfman was even... I had no idea Marv Wolfman was over at Eclipse Comics too. That's an ad for it. And then here's a kind of weird connective tissue. I bought these comics from, were they Gold Key, I think? And have I showed them in another haul? Now I can't remember for sure. Called Lost in Space. But if you look closely, it was the Space Family Robinson Lost in Space. But it was actually a comic that started before the TV show Lost in Space and had nothing to do with it, but by chance had the Space Family Robinson, I guess a take on the Swiss Family Robinson. a family on a space station kind of thing that got turned into a spaceship, and they got lost in space. And anyway, apparently they made a deal with the people doing the TV show, and they added the Lost in Space, or the Swiss Space Family. They changed the title slightly and were allowed to kind of cash in on the TV show, even though they weren't the TV show, because they had the title first. Kind of funny. But inside, I was looking at the art, and I couldn't find a signature or anything on the artwork, and I really liked it. And I thought maybe this is Alex Toth or something, and I put that up on Twitter asking, is this Alex Toth, or who is this artwork by? And some people came back at me who are huge fans of Dan Spiegel, and I think someone even has a website or a Twitter account devoted to his work. And so it was Dan Spiegel artwork, who is kind of in the, at least at times, in the Alex Toth vein, an artist that I totally was not interested in when I came across his work in the 70s. Maybe it was mostly in war comics. I'm not sure. But I've been reading a lot of Gru, and I was aware that Mark Evener, however you say his name, who is the scripting assistant of Gru, had an Eclipse comic called Crossfire that he did with Dan Spiegel. And then I found a whole bunch of Crossfire in the bargain bin for almost no money. So I said, what the heck, I'll grab it. And of course, it starts with number 2. And the artwork does look very cool. It has even for 1980s, it has a very old look. It looks like artwork that you might have found in adventure comic strips in the newspapers that were just beginning to fade away when I was young. So anyway, I really look forward to digging into this. I guess I'll have to just read it without number 1. Nice paper for the early 80s. So it's another Eclipse comic. The date is 1984. So I think, although this ran for a while and has its hardcore fans who say it's really good, it's something that never gained much traction and doesn't have much of a reputation. So this is number 3. On the back is an ad for Saber. Now joined Don McGregor with new artist Jose Ortiz. So Saber went through a lot of artists, I guess, which is too bad. It's too bad Galassi didn't remain on it. I wonder if there's a story there why Galassi and McGregor didn't continue with their creation. This is a really cool cover on number 4. Spiegel is the kind of artist who's, the master of the old use of blacks, and also lots of great layouts. But I do think there's an aspect kind of like Alex Toth, and why Alex Toth doesn't always totally grab me. There's an aspect of it that just looks like slick commercial art that you might have seen in a catalog in the 50s and 60s. But anyway, there's also a lot good about it. And on the back, I like to see the ads for other things I've never heard of. Another Mark Evanier comic drawn by Rick Hoberg and Al Gordon called Surge. I have absolutely no memory of ever seeing that comic. And here is number 5, yes. That's also a very cool comic. And advertised on the back is another book I've never heard of. It doesn't say who did it, though. The Masked Man. Nowadays, indie comics don't try to do superheroes. And a lot of these, like Saber and John Sable, were not really trying to do superheroes, although they were at the trying to do pulp adventure. And maybe Crossfire's a cross between that. Number 6, another really cool cover. And advertised on the back, Axel Press button featuring Mr. Mistralis laser eraser. Backup and cover by Brian Boland. Maybe these were the reprints before they started doing the original stuff, or maybe that's original stuff too. Issue number 7. I thought at first that looks like he's holding a giant gun, but I think it's a movie camera. And on the back they are advertising something called Southern Nights. But I don't know if that's published by, I don't think that's published by Eclipse. It's a comics interview publication. Don't know what that's about. Probably some attempt by the magazine Comics Interview to break out into actually publishing comics. Okay, a little more. I didn't realize this isn't Eclipse. Starslayer came from First Comics, unless it started with Eclipse. And this is Starslayer was a Mike Grell comic, but this is a Timothy Truman cover. I guess somewhat giving the vibe of the uncomfortably sexy men of Mike Grell art. And inside we see that it is written by John Ostrander and art by Timothy Truman. I don't know where this comes in the career arc of Timothy Truman, if he'd already created Scout and what's his other well-known? Grimjack. This is from 1984. The art's pretty good. It doesn't have quite the intensity that I in my mind think of Timothy Truman having, although the cover does. So maybe he just, I know he was doing a lot of work very fast back then, as I heard in the Kayfabe interview. So here's number 18, Starslayer meets Grimjack at last. So since I think Ostrander and Timothy Truman created Grimjack, why not have them cross over since they're working on it? A 28-page book-length thriller. There's that. Starslayer number 19. Another Timothy Truman cover. I wonder if Grimjack's still in there. Maybe not. Oh, that's kind of a cool image. Makes me think of Heavy Metal Magazine or something. Starslayer number 20. Morgan Lives. I read back in the 80s, I read the first few issues of Starslayer. Maybe I dropped off as soon as Grell left it, but I can't remember what it was about, other than a man who was scantily dressed showing off his abs a lot. Here's a very different cover. I don't think this is Truman. Starslayer presents the Black Flame, but it's actually issue 27 of Starslayer. That's a really cool cover. I really like that. I guess, is that a signature of some sort right there? I don't know. Interior art by Tom Sutton. So maybe that's a Tom Sutton cover. Maybe I'm grooving on the Tom Sutton. Peter Gillis is now the writer. Tom Sutton and Don Lomax. Was Don Lomax an inker? I've never heard of him. Colors by Rick Taylor. And those are nice colors for 1984 or so. Are we in 1985 by now? So I don't know who the Black Flame is, but that sounds cool. I like the name, the Black Flame. And back to an Eclipse comic, number 2 of The Hand of Fate. I don't know anything about this, and if there were more than 2 issues, do I need to read issue 1, or is this a standalone story? It was written by Bruce Jones, who I equate with a lot of independent comics, usually in anthologies, short stories. He was quite the short story writer of science fiction and horror. So maybe this was standalone. I don't even see a title unless there's The Night of the Widow. There we go. So I suspect this is probably a standalone. The Hand of Fate. In the back we have ads for Phase. Never heard of that. From Fred Burke and Raphael Kayanan, who later went on to do a lot of Conan, I think, in the 90s. The Eclipse collection of paper dolls appears in these publications. Wow, paper dolls. Who'd have thunk? Scout, War Shaman. It's a mean old world to have to live in all by yourself. a masterwork of high adventure. Every issue featuring book-length stories and illustration by Timothy Truman. Every issue in graphic album quality full color. Every issue bound in Eclipse's revolutionary 5-star cardstock covers. So I guess Scout came out in 1985 then? I need to hunt up the Scout in its revolutionary covers. Skywolf in Vietnam. Was Skywolf a Golden Age character, perhaps, who they revived because he was out of print? Because this is by Chuck Dixon, and I think Chuck Dixon also did Skyboy. Is that Airboy, which was a Golden Age character that was out of copyright. And the return of Sergeant Strike. He's back, and he's bad. He doesn't look so bad in that picture. He looks kind of goofy. Rudyard Kipling's Red Dog, an adaptation by P. Craig Russell. I've never heard of that one. I thought I knew of most of P. Craig Russell's adaptations. That's something to look for. And the complete classic adventures of Z by Alex Toth. I think that's Zorro. So Alex Toth did Zorro. There ought to be some oversized hardback collection from Fantagraphics on that. Maybe there is. And on the back cover, 10 Years of Superheroes, Eclipse Comics. So they started in 1978. Oh, this is 1988. So Truman's Scout came out in 88. Well, I don't know why I said 85. I think a previous comic I was looking at was from 1985. So I just love that digging in the bins and finding things that I half remember or don't remember, buying them cheaply. They pile up in giant piles, filling up boxes, and I need to read more of them. I'll get back to you on the ones I do read. And I will talk to you all again soon. Bye-bye.